When I was 29, I finally bought my first house. It wasn't huge, not a mansion or anything, just a 3-bedroom ranch-style home outside Boulder, Colorado. Quiet neighborhood, mountain air, wide windows that let in the sun. I thought it was perfect. Moving in felt like a fresh start. My job at the marketing firm was going well. I'd saved enough to feel proud, and for once, I thought maybe life was heading somewhere stable. But I had one major problem. I was terrible at upkeep. I hated cleaning. Dishes piled up, dust gathered on every surface, and after a week, my dream house already felt like a mess. That's when I decided to hire help. I found her through a local ad pinned to a coffee shop corkboard. Experienced housekeeper, reliable, reasonable. Call Evelyn. She arrived the following Tuesday. Evelyn was in her early 60s, tall, thin, with gray hair tucked into a neat bun. She wore a plain black dress with an apron tied tightly around her waist, as if she had stepped straight out of another era. Her face was long, her features sharp, and her eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, never seemed to blink long enough. "You need someone to keep your home in order?" she asked. Her voice was flat, measured. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Floors, laundry, kitchen. Just the usual." She nodded once. "I keep homes very clean, but I require rules." "Rules?" I repeated, half amused. Her expression didn't change. "No watching me while I clean. No entering rooms until I am finished. And most importantly," she paused, her pale eyes fixing on mine, "never cover the mirrors. I need them uncovered." I blinked. Okay. It was odd, sure, but I figured everyone had their quirks. Maybe she liked checking her work in reflections, or maybe she was just eccentric. Either way, I needed the help, so I agreed. The first week was fine. She moved through the house silently, efficiently. I'd come home to find everything immaculate, the counters gleaming, clothes folded so neatly it looked professional, the hardwood floors polished to a shine. But I noticed something strange. Every time I came home, the mirrors were spotless. Not just clean, perfectly clean. No smudges, no streaks. They shone like glass in a showroom. I had 6 mirrors in the house, and all of them looked freshly polished, almost glowing. At first, I appreciated it, but then I started to notice her reflection. One evening, I came home early and found Evelyn in the hallway, standing in front of the tall mirror near my bedroom. She wasn't cleaning it. She was just staring. Her body was rigid, her face blank, her lips moving silently. "Evelyn?" I said. She flinched like I'd caught her doing something forbidden. Her eyes snapped to mine. For a brief second, I thought I saw something else in the mirror behind her. A dark shape, taller than her, leaning in close to her ear. But then it was gone. "I was just finishing," she said quickly, gathering her supplies. I tried to laugh it off, but unease twisted in my gut. That night, I dreamed of mirrors, endless mirrors stretching into blackness, and in every reflection, something moved just behind me. For a while, I convinced myself I was imagining things. New house, new stress, new person in my daily life. It made sense that my brain was playing tricks on me. But Evelyn's rules started to gnaw at me. The second week, I came home from work later than usual. The house was spotless, but one thing stood out. In the bathroom, steam fogged the mirror even though no one had showered. My first thought was that the plumbing had a leak, but when I wiped the glass with my hand, words stared back at me, faint and jagged, as though traced by a fingertip. "Don't cover us." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself Evelyn must have written it, though why she'd leave a message like that, I had no clue. The next morning, I confronted her. She arrived promptly at 9 a.m., carrying her bucket and supplies, her face unreadable. I led her to the bathroom. "Care to explain this?" I asked, pointing to the mirror. Her pale eyes lingered on the faint letters, then flicked to me. "You shouldn't wipe it off," I swallowed. "You wrote this?" "No." Her voice was flat, steady. "They did." A chill crawled down my spine. "Who's they?" Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "The ones who live in the glass. They don't like being ignored." I laughed nervously, though my voice cracked. "Come on, you can't expect me to believe." "You hired me to keep your house clean," she interrupted. "That includes keeping them calm. Do not cover the mirrors. Do not question them. Leave them to me." Her calmness was worse than shouting. It wasn't a joke. She believed it. That night, I couldn't stop staring at the hallway mirror outside my bedroom. Every time I passed, I felt like it watched me. My reflection looked normal, but when I moved quickly, I swore there was a lag, like my reflection didn't quite keep up. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound like nails tapping glass. Slowly, I turned my head toward the mirror across the room. Something moved inside it. Not my reflection. Not a trick of the light. A hand. Long, pale fingers dragging down the inside of the glass, leaving foggy streaks behind. I froze. My throat closed. Then faintly, a whisper hissed. "He sees us." I ripped the blanket over my head like a terrified child. I stayed like that until the gray light of dawn crept into the room. The next morning, Evelyn arrived as usual. I was pale, exhausted, barely able to hold myself together. "They tried to touch me," I blurted the second she stepped through the door. She paused, her expression tightening just a fraction. "You looked too long. You shouldn't stare. They can tell when someone notices them." My voice shook. "Why didn't you warn me?" Her gaze was sharp, cold. "Would you have believed me?" I didn't answer. Instead, I followed her as she moved through the house that day. She polished every mirror meticulously, whispering under her breath. Once I caught the words, "Stay, stay calm. He is not yours yet." Yet, the word echoed in my skull. I began avoiding mirrors entirely. I brushed my teeth without looking at the bathroom sink. I kept my eyes down when I walked through the hallway. But the less I looked, the more I felt. A presence, just beyond sight, watching, waiting. The worst was the living room mirror. One night, as I walked past it on my way to bed, I caught a glimpse I couldn't ignore. Not me, not my reflection. A face, grinning, teeth too sharp, eyes hollow, pressed against the glass from the inside. I stumbled back, heart hammering. From upstairs, I heard Evelyn's voice, soft, chanting. And behind me, in the mirror, the grin widened. By the third week, the house had become unbearable. I never looked into mirrors anymore. I walked past them quickly, my eyes glued to the floor, my chest tight. But the presence was always there. Every corner, every shadow, every reflective surface carried it. I could feel it pressing against the glass, watching, waiting for me to slip. One night, I woke to the sound of glass scraping. It was subtle at first, just a faint scratching, like fingernails against a window. But it grew louder, sharper, echoing through the empty hall. My breath came fast. I turned slowly toward the living room mirror and froze. The figure from the reflections wasn't just inside the glass anymore. It was emerging. Its pale, elongated hands pressed against the surface, straining. Its mouth stretched into a grin that was impossibly wide, showing teeth too long to be human. Its eyes, dark, hollow, endless, locked onto me. I stumbled backward. The candles Evelyn had placed flickered violently, shadows dancing along the walls. From the kitchen, I heard Evelyn's calm, measured voice. "Do not panic. Do not break eye contact. Step into the circle." Circle? I looked down and saw chalk lines traced on the living room floor. forming a perfect circle around the area where the mirror's reflection reached. Evelyn knelt just inside it, chanting softly, a small curved blade in her hand. The figure's hands pushed further against the glass. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. It hissed, high-pitched, metallic, a sound that pierced my skull. I froze. My heart was hammering, my stomach twisted. I realized then it wasn't just a reflection. It was trying to escape. "Step in," Evelyn commanded, her voice rising over the shriek. My legs moved of their own accord. I stumbled into the circle, my back pressing against Evelyn. She held my hand over the blade. "It's feeding off you. You must draw blood." I shook my head. What? It's inside you." "The mirrors are its doorway," she said, her pale eyes gleaming. "Cut yourself, now, or it will take you." The figure pressed harder against the glass, which cracked further, jagged lines racing across the surface. I saw its teeth gnashing, its form stretching like smoke. Its whisper was everywhere now, 1,000 voices in unison. "Let me out. I belong to you. Step away." I couldn't breathe. My hand was on the blade. The adrenaline was insane. My body screamed for me to run, but my mind knew the truth. If I stepped out of the circle, if I let my fear control me, it would be over. I pressed the blade to my arm. Pain flared immediately. Not normal blood, but black ichor, thick and hot, seeping out. The entity shrieked, recoiling violently. The mirror shook, cracks splintered across it. Evelyn chanted louder, pressing her own blood-stained hand to my forehead. The ichor sizzled where it touched the chalk line, curling into smoke that hissed and writhed. The figure thrashed, clawing at the circle, but it could not escape. "Again," Evelyn shouted. "Draw more! It must leave your body!" I slashed deeper, my vision blurred, my knees hitting the floor. The shadow convulsed in the mirror, shrieking, twisting, until finally, slowly, impossibly, the surface went still. The reflection of the figure disappeared. The living room mirror returned to normal. Only my own terrified reflection stared back. I collapsed against the floor, trembling, every muscle burning. Evelyn knelt beside me, whispering softly, "It is gone, for now. But it will remember you. Shadows never die." I wanted to vomit, scream, cry all at once. My arm throbbed, stained black with the ichor. "Why me?" I croaked. "Why did it choose me?" Evelyn looked at me with those pale, colorless eyes. "Because you were alone. Because you were empty. Shadows seek emptiness. They attach to what is weak or unaware. That is why I warned you to leave the mirrors uncovered, so I could watch, so I could protect you." I shivered. "Protect me? By bleeding me?" "Yes," she said softly. "By bleeding you, I take the shadow from your body and contain it. It is not destroyed, it is contained. That is all I can do." I swallowed hard. "So, it can come back?" She nodded. "Eventually. Shadows always find a way back." And just like that, it became clear. Evelyn wasn't just a maid. She was a guardian, a warden, someone who walked the line between life and something far darker. The house fell silent, but I didn't sleep. Every reflective surface felt alive. Every glance over my shoulder carried weight. I couldn't cover the mirrors. I couldn't remove them. Because I knew, deep down, that if I ever did, the entity would return. And next time, it might not wait for me to bleed. The weeks after the incident were quiet, but tense. Evelyn remained in the house, quietly tending to every reflective surface. She never explained where the shadows came from, never spoke of their origin. She simply cleaned, watched, whispered. I learned to live around her rituals. I didn't question them anymore. I didn't enter rooms while she worked. I never covered a mirror. I avoided reflections when possible. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I thought I heard faint scratching or whispers, but Evelyn was always there, calm and vigilant, murmuring under her breath. I realized I had traded my freedom for safety. I could never truly leave the house, never truly be alone. The shadows had marked me, and while Evelyn contained them, she could not destroy them. Not entirely. And sometimes, when I pass the mirrors, I catch a flicker in the corner of my vision. A flash of teeth, a glint of hollow eyes. I blink and it's gone. But I know it's still there, waiting.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
When I was 30, I moved into my first real house, an old Victorian in Salem, Massachusetts. It wasn't large, but it had charm. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a wraparound porch that caught the afternoon sun. The previous owners had left it well-maintained, but years of age had a way of hiding dust, cobwebs, and secrets behind every corner. I was busy with my career, traveling frequently for work, and the thought of keeping the house spotless was exhausting. That's when I decided to hire a maid. Her name was Lillian. I met her on a Tuesday morning. She was in her late 50s, petite, with silver hair pulled into a bun. Her hands were thin, with long fingers that moved almost like claws when she held her cleaning tools. She was polite, quiet, and extremely efficient. "I keep houses clean," she said when I asked about her experience. "But some houses require more than mops and dusters." I smiled politely, unsure if she was joking. "And this is one of those houses?" She didn't answer, just nodded and started inspecting the rooms. The first few days were normal. I came home to polished floors, dust-free furniture, and a faint scent of lavender in the air. But slowly, I started noticing odd things. Footsteps at night. Not the soft, scuttling sound of a normal house settling, but deliberate, slow steps across the hardwood floors, pacing the hallways outside my bedroom. When I called out, no one answered. Objects moved. A chair in the kitchen would be slightly out of place. My keys would vanish and reappear on the dining table. I thought I was imagining things, until one night I caught a shadow flicker across the living room, just beyond the edge of the lamplight. I began watching Lillian more closely. She worked silently, often speaking to herself in whispers I couldn't understand. Sometimes, I thought I heard her whispering my name as she scrubbed the floors. One evening, I followed her into the attic. She was kneeling, placing small stones in a circle on the dusty wooden floor. Candles surrounded them. She didn't notice me. "They like it clean," she murmured, almost to herself. "The house doesn't forgive filth." I froze. "The house?" Her head snapped up. Her pale blue eyes seemed to pierce me. "Yes, this house remembers. It sees everything. It punishes neglect." I laughed nervously, but her tone chilled me more than her words. "Punishes neglect?" "Not you, not yet," she said softly. "But it can." From that moment, I realized I wasn't dealing with a normal maid. It started slowly. At first, subtle things. Creaking floors where no one had stepped, faint, cold drafts, and whispers that seemed to echo from the walls. I chalked it up to the age of the house, until the floors themselves seemed alive. I'd walk across the hallway at night, and the floorboards beneath my feet would shiver, groan, as if something beneath the wood were moving. Sometimes I felt a brush of air against my ankle, like a hand sliding across my leg. One night, I awoke to soft whispering outside my bedroom door. "Leave it alone," a voice hissed, low, guttural, and unmistakably human. I sat up, heart racing. "Lillian?" I called. No answer, only the whisper repeated, louder this time. "It will not forgive." I grabbed a flashlight and slowly crept down the stairs. Lillian was in the kitchen, kneeling on the floor, whispering over a series of small, carved wooden blocks I hadn't noticed before. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She looked up at me. Her eyes seemed distant, almost glowing. "Cleaning," she said simply. "The house will not tolerate stains. It will not forgive dust. It will consume all that is careless." I felt my stomach twist. Her words made no sense, yet the air felt heavier, charged with an unseen force. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floors, every gust of wind, every shadow in the corners of the room felt pu. I felt watched, tracked, as though the house itself had eyes. And then I realized, Lillian didn't just clean. She listened. She spoke to the house. She was its intermediary. By the third week, my nights were unbearable. The whispering had grown louder. Not just voices in the walls, but words from the floors, soft at first, then insistent. Step lightly. Do not anger it. It hungers. I tried to dismiss it. Exhaustion. Stress. The house settling. Anything to rationalize the terror crawling under my skin. But rationalizations didn't stop the floors from trembling beneath my feet. One evening, I was reading in the living room when I felt a pressure beneath me, subtle at first, then intense, as if something were pressing up from below. The air grew cold, and the shadows in the corners deepened unnaturally. I froze. The whispering began again, louder, closer, as if the house were right beside me. It waits. It remembers. It judges. I wanted to run, but the front door wouldn't open. It had always locked automatically, but that night it wouldn't budge. Panic surged. I ran to the windows. Locked. Every reflective surface, every pane of glass seemed to shimmer with movement, faint figures behind them, waiting. Lillian appeared then, as if summoned. She moved silently, her pale face calm, her blue eyes unnervingly steady. You should not have listened, she said softly, kneeling and tracing her fingers along the floorboards. It knows your fear. That is all it needs. What is it? I demanded, my voice trembling. She glanced at me, a faint, almost sorrowful expression crossing her features. The house is alive. It is old, older than any of us. It feeds on carelessness, on neglect, on fear. I am here to keep it controlled. I wanted to laugh, but the tremor in my knees made it impossible. That's insane, I shouted. It's just a building. Wood, brick, plaster. Her eyes locked on mine. Do you see the floors, Mem? I swallowed, unable to speak. She whispered over the boards again, chanting softly, almost in rhythm with the groans of the house. The floor tremor stopped, but the shadows seemed to lengthen, gathering near the corners like dark liquid pooling along the walls. Why me? I croaked. Why did it target me? Because you brought it here, she said calmly. You didn't clean. You didn't respect it. You left your house open. I felt a sting of guilt and fear. She wasn't lying. I had been negligent. I had ignored cracks in the wood, dust gathering in the corners, peeling wallpaper. The house had noticed, and now it was angry. That night, the house made itself clear. I awoke to the sound of 1,000 footsteps pacing through the hallways. Furniture rattled. Windows banged against their frames. The whispering was deafening, filling my skull with countless voices, none mine, all warning, all accusing. Lillian appeared at my doorway. Her hand was stretched toward me, her palm open. You must help me contain it, she said. It cannot leave, not entirely, but it can destroy you if I do this alone. Contain it? I asked, terror clawing at my throat. Yes, you will participate. The floors, the walls, they are part of the house. You cannot fight them alone. I will guide you. You must follow exactly. Her calmness, her authority, overpowered my panic. I had no choice. I nodded, my body shaking. She handed me a small iron talisman and began marking symbols on the floor with chalk. Step only where I direct. Speak only what I say. Do not falter. I obeyed, though my mind screamed at me. The whispering surged as we moved through the house, the shadows gathering and stretching across the walls, pressing close, testing the circle of... I collapsed onto the cold boards, exhausted, trembling, my chest heaving. Lillian knelt beside me, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "It is contained," she whispered. "For now, but it remembers. It will test you again, always, and it will not forgive another mistake." I realized then that my life had changed forever. I was no longer alone in this house. I shared it with something ancient, patient, and hungry, and with the maid who had become both protector and warden. It had been a week since Lillian contained the house. I tried to sleep, but every creak, every groan of the old wood kept me awake. The house felt alive in a way I could no longer ignore. I avoided the mirrors, walked carefully over the floors, and never went near the attic. Still, I could feel it. Something lurking just beneath the surface, waiting. Lillian's calm presence offered some comfort, but I also feared her. She wasn't just a maid. She was a warden, a sentinel for the house's will. That night, the warning came. The whispering returned, soft at first, crawling into my ears, then growing louder, more insistent. "You failed. You ignored. You will pay." The room was dark, but the air was thick, heavy, and icy. Something moved along the floorboards, something alive. Shadows stretched along the walls, forming shapes I could barely recognize, reaching toward me. I stumbled from my bed, heart hammering. Lillian was already in the room. Kneeling on the floor, chalk in hand, drawing symbols faster than I could follow. "It's testing you," she said, without looking up. "The containment weakens. You must help. You must follow exactly." "What do I do?" I gasped. "Step into the circle. Keep your eyes on me. Speak only what I say." I obeyed, trembling. The floors quivered beneath me as I stepped inside the chalk circle. The shadows writhed at the edges, pressing closer, whispering, clawing. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Lillian chanted softly, her voice steady and commanding. "By my hand, by my blood, by your will, this house obeys." The floorboards groaned louder. One snapped beneath my foot, and a black tendril shot out, wrapping around my ankle. Pain seared through my leg, as if the wood itself was biting me. I screamed, but Lillian's voice rose above the chaos. "Do not struggle. Control your fear." I clenched the talisman in my hand, repeating the words she had taught me, letting her guide my movements. Slowly the tendril withdrew. Another snapped upward, reaching for my chest. I struck it with the talisman. It hissed and recoiled, but more were coming. Hundreds of black shapes crawling beneath the floorboards, pressing at the edges of the chalk circle. Lillian's voice grew louder, urgent. "Now! Draw the line with blood." Before I could protest, she cut her palm and pressed it against the floor. The black tendrils shrieked, recoiling violently. Writhing like burning smoke, I followed her, using my own blood, letting it drip into the symbols she had drawn. Pain shot through me, burning, but the shadows faltered, screaming, twisting, until finally, silence. The house fell completely still. Not a creak, not a groan, not a whisper. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lillian lowered herself beside me. Her hand rested on my shoulder, steadying me. "It is contained, for now," she whispered. "You did well, but remember this, the house never forgets. It waits. It tests. You cannot falter again." I sank to the floor, exhausted, bloodied, trembling. My life had changed forever. The house was no longer just wood and brick. It was alive, and I shared it with something ancient and hungry. "Will it come back?" I asked, voice barely audible. "Yes," she said. "Eventually. It will always come back. That is the price of this house. That is the price of living in it." I looked around, finally noticing the way the shadows clung to the corners. Lingering despite the sea, even contained, I could feel the presence, patient and watchful. Lillian stood, brushing herself off, her expression calm and indifferent. "You will learn to live with it," she said, "and I will remain, always." I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go. The house had me now. The floors remembered my every misstep. The walls watched my every movement. And if I ever faltered again, the house would punish me in ways I could not survive. That night, I finally understood. I did not live in the house. I belonged to it. And Lillian, the maid, the warden, was its eternal guardian. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint whisper of the floors beneath me. Somewhere deep inside, the house moved, patient, calculating, waiting for the next test. And I would be ready, because if I failed, I would be consumed.
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
When I was 28, I moved into my first apartment alone in a quiet suburb in the United States. It was a modest, 2-story house with creaky wooden floors and a garden that had been abandoned for years. I had just left a stressful corporate job and decided it was time for a fresh start. The isolation was both soothing and unnerving. I had always enjoyed being alone, but there was a part of me that secretly welcomed the idea of someone else living with me, even if it was a maid. The ad I found online promised a responsible and discreet housekeeper for someone with a busy schedule. I didn't think twice. Within a week, she was at my door. She introduced herself as Marjorie, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and a calm, almost hypnotic voice. She smiled politely, but her eyes, dark, deep, and unblinking, gave me an uncomfortable feeling I tried to shake off. "I'll keep the house spotless," she said, placing a hand on the doorframe, as if she were claiming the place. "You won't have to lift a finger." I nodded and ushered her in. She began working immediately, dusting, washing, and organizing with an eerie efficiency. I marveled at how quickly she seemed to anticipate what needed doing. Within a few days, the house looked immaculate. Too immaculate, almost unreal. But I told myself I was just grateful. Then the small oddities began. It started with the little things. Objects in my home weren't where I remembered leaving them. The silverware would be rearranged, chairs slightly turned, books moved from one shelf to another. I assumed Marjorie was just cleaning meticulously. But then I noticed something stranger. At night, I would wake up to the sound of quiet footsteps in the hall outside my bedroom. My apartment was small, and it was impossible to ignore the creaks of the wooden floor. I asked Marjorie once, politely, if she had been up late cleaning. She smiled faintly. "Sleep is important," she said, her tone sweet but firm. "I wouldn't disturb you." The next day, I found little notes left around the house. They weren't messages for me, exactly. They were more like observations. One on the kitchen counter read, "You didn't eat breakfast today. You seem tense." Another in the living room simply said, "You prefer the couch to the bed." I laughed nervously and crumpled them, telling myself it was just a weird habit of hers. But it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of being watched. One night, I woke to the sound of a whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Why do you hide here?" I bolted upright in bed. The room was empty. The window was shut. The doors were locked. A week later, I returned home from work to find the house in chaos. But not the kind of chaos that came from clumsiness or neglect. This was calculated. Furniture was overturned, cupboards left open, the walls marked with scratches like someone or something had scrawled across them in a hurry. I called out for Marjorie. No answer. Then I saw her standing at the top of the staircase, her silhouette sharp against the dim light. Her face was calm, almost smiling, but her eyes were wild. "You're home late," she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You shouldn't be alone." Fear clawed at my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. Before I could react, she was downstairs. The hallway seemed impossibly long as I tried to get past her. She blocked my path effortlessly, moving with a speed and precision that was inhuman. "I just want to help you," she whispered. "You'll see. You'll understand soon." I fled to my bedroom and locked the door, but the scratching began almost immediately, at first on the walls, then on the door itself. I realized, with a growing horror, that she wasn't just cleaning or watching. She was marking me, marking the house, marking me inside. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't leave the house without feeling her eyes on me, following me through every room. The notes continued, now filled with cryptic warnings and confessions. "I know your secrets. You can't hide from me." One evening, I returned home to find the living room transformed. The furniture had been rearranged into a grotesque pattern, almost ritualistic. At the center was a small, crude doll made from pieces of cloth and string, a miniature version of me. My blood ran cold. I tried to call the police, but my phone had been destroyed, screen shattered, battery dead. I was trapped. I considered fleeing through the back door, but Marjorie was already there, waiting silently in the shadows. "Don't be afraid," she said, tilting her head. "You invited me here." I screamed and ran, hiding in the attic, my heart hammering. From above, I could see her walking through the house as if it were her domain. She whispered my name, over and over, her voice echoing through the walls. It was then that I understood. She hadn't been hired to clean. She had been sent, or had chosen, to claim me, to make me part of her collection. I don't remember how long I stayed in the attic, but exhaustion finally forced me to move. I crept down the staircase, every step sounding like a drumbeat in the silent house. And then I saw her, Marjorie, standing in the kitchen, holding a knife that glinted under the dim light. "I've been waiting for this," she said, smiling like a predator. I ran past her, heart in my throat, but the front door slammed shut as if by invisible hands. Panic consumed me. I was trapped. And then, just as suddenly as it began, she was gone. No footsteps, no voice, no presence. The house was silent. My body shook uncontrollably as I tried the door. It opened easily this time, and I ran into the night, never looking back. I called the police the next morning, but there was no evidence of her ever being in the house. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing. Just the notes, now fading into dust, and the doll sitting innocently on the kitchen counter. I never stayed in that apartment again. I never hired another maid. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear faint footsteps in the dark. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear a whisper, "You can't hide from me."
If you thought that story was scary, wait until you hear this next one.
When I was 28, I moved into my first house alone. It was a small 2-story Victorian in a quiet suburb of upstate New York, inherited from my late aunt. I had just quit a stressful corporate job, hoping for some peace and solitude. The house was charming, but it had been neglected for years. The floors were coated in dust, cobwebs clung to the corners, and the garden had become a jungle. It was perfect, peaceful, mine. But soon, I realized I wasn't equipped to handle the maintenance alone. That's when I saw the ad online. Experienced, discreet, live-in housekeeper available immediately. References provided. The picture showed a woman in her 40s, neat and composed, with a warm smile. I called immediately. Her name was Marjorie. When she arrived, she carried a small suitcase and a leather-bound notebook. She introduced herself politely, shaking my hand, and for a moment I felt comforted. She was efficient, professional, and strangely calm. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, made me shiver briefly, but I brushed it off. Everyone has a presence that unnerves you at first, I told myself. I'll make sure your home is spotless, she said softly. You won't have to lift a finger. Just focus on your life. I agreed. She moved in the next day, and almost immediately, the house began to change. Marjorie was remarkable. In the first week, she scrubbed floors until they gleamed, polished every surface, and restored the garden to something approaching sanity. She seemed to anticipate what needed to be done, often finishing chores I hadn't even noticed were undone. I was impressed, grateful, but soon the small, unsettling details began. It started with the little things. Objects in the house were not where I remembered leaving them. My favorite mug would be in the pantry, my glasses on the kitchen counter, even though I'd left them on the nightstand. I assumed she moved things while cleaning. Then the notes began appearing. At first, they were harmless. You left the window open. A cold draft will make you sick. Then they became more personal. You didn't eat breakfast today. You seemed tense. I laughed nervously the first time I found one. By the third note, unease had taken root in my chest. I began noticing shadows in my peripheral vision. A hallway would seem empty. Then I'd glimpse a figure, just a shape, before it disappeared. Marjorie was always there, smiling politely, saying nothing. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. I froze. They were slow, deliberate. Then a whisper, almost inaudible. "Why do you hide here?" I bolted upright. The room was empty. The window was shut, the door locked. Within a month, the feeling of being watched became oppressive. I would enter a room, feel a chill, and see Marjorie silently observing from a shadowed corner. Her presence was always calm, almost serene, but the intensity of her gaze made my skin crawl. One evening, I returned from work to find the house in mild disarray. Not chaotic, but off. The furniture was slightly misaligned, the chairs no longer facing the same direction. A single note lay on the living room table. "You are uneasy today. I know why." My heart raced. I tried to confront her. "Marjorie, these notes, what are they for?" I asked. She smiled gently, folding her hands in front of her. "To help you feel comfortable," she said. "I just want you to be at peace." Her calmness only made me more unsettled. Then came the night I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the soft sound of fabric dragging across the floor. I held my breath. The door creaked. A shadow passed across the room. I froze, too terrified to move. A whisper, "You can't hide from me." Weeks passed, and Marjorie's behavior escalated. Objects in the house were no longer just moved, they were altered. Drawers opened to reveal my personal items rearranged, clothing folded in meticulous but strange patterns, books lined up not by size or subject, but seemingly by some unknown code. I tried to leave the house. Each time I reached for the door, it felt heavier, as if something invisible resisted my exit. I'd hear faint footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, but when I turned, no one was there. Then, the notes took a darker turn. "I see what you do when you think no one watches. I see everything. You belong here now." I called my best friend, Sarah, and begged her to come stay with me. She arrived the next morning and spent the day helping me clean and organize the house. That night, though, Sarah left, leaving me alone. By the next morning, she wouldn't answer her phone. She later told me that when she got home, she felt uneasy and that she swore someone or something had been following her in her own apartment. I was alone again. One night, I returned home to find the living room transformed. Chairs were inverted on the ceiling, tables flipped, and in the center of the chaos lay a small, crude doll. It was made of cloth and string, a miniature version of me. My stomach turned. I ran to the kitchen, desperate to leave, only to find Marjorie standing silently in the doorway, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She was holding a knife, not threateningly, but as if it were part of a ritual. "You've invited me in," she said softly, tilting her head, "and now you can't leave. This house and you belong to me." I bolted to the staircase, up to the attic, and locked myself in. From above, I could hear her walking through the house, whispering my name over and over, her voice echoing through the walls. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't human. She was something older, something patient, something that had waited for me. I spent hours, maybe days, hiding. I don't know. Time lost meaning. And then, a horrifying realization. She hadn't been cleaning. She had been observing, marking, and preparing. She had studied me, learned my habits, my fears, my secrets, and now she wanted to claim me. I knew I had to leave. I crept down the stairs, every step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. And there she was, standing at the bottom, waiting. Her knife caught the dim light, but it was her eyes that froze me in place. Dark, endless, unblinking. "I've been waiting for this moment," she said, smiling. I ran past her, stumbling into the hallway toward the front door. But the door slammed shut before I could reach it, as if gripped by invisible hands. Panic set in, and I screamed, searching for anything to break my escape. Then, as suddenly as it had started, she was gone. The house was silent. My breath came in ragged gasps. The front door, now inexplicably unlocked, swung open easily. I ran into the night without looking back. I never returned. I called the police, but there was no evidence of her ever being there. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. Only the doll remained, sitting innocently on my old kitchen counter. I moved out of the house, sold it as quickly as I could. I never hired another maid. I never went back. But sometimes, even now, years later, I hear soft footsteps in the dark. A whisper calls my name, faint, patient, and I know deep down that Marjorie never truly left. I don't know what she was, if she was human at all, but I learned something essential. Sometimes help comes in forms you cannot trust, and sometimes, when you open your door to someone, you invite more than assistance. You invite the darkness into your life, and that darkness waits patiently, always. You can't hide from me. End.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
When I was 28, I moved into a large old Victorian house in the outskirts of Boston. It had belonged to my grandmother before she passed, and I inherited it unexpectedly. The house was imposing, with dark wood paneling, winding staircases, and a musty, lingering scent that never quite left. I was alone for the first time in my life, and the house felt both liberating and oppressive. After a few weeks of struggling to keep it in order, I decided to hire a maid. The ad I found promised a discreet, highly skilled housekeeper experienced in maintaining old estates. Her name was Lenora. She arrived on a rainy afternoon, her long black coat dripping, her hair glossy and perfectly arranged, her presence commanding. "I'll take care of everything," she said in a voice soft and melodic, yet strangely hypnotic. "You'll never have to worry about the house or yourself again." I felt a strange shiver run down my spine, but I ignored it. I was alone, and the house was overwhelming. Having help seemed like a blessing. From the first day, Lenora seemed almost too perfect. She moved silently through the house, cleaning, organizing, and straightening in a way that felt uncanny. Within days, the house looked as though it had been restored to its former glory. Floors gleamed, dust vanished, and the air felt charged. She often lingered near me when I was alone, her eyes scanning me with intensity. It was unsettling, but she never spoke, unless spoken to. She had an aura of quiet authority that both comforted and terrified me. Then came the first note. It was small, written in delicate black ink. "You are alone. That will change soon." I laughed nervously. Perhaps it was some eccentric habit of hers. I crumpled it and threw it in the trash. But the notes continued, each one more personal than the last. "You dream too lightly. You fear the dark, yet you wander in it. You cannot hide what is already mine." I tried to brush it off, telling myself that the stress of moving and running the house alone was affecting my mind. But a growing sense of unease took root, one I couldn't shake. Soon, the changes in the house were impossible to ignore. Mirrors seemed dimmer, reflecting shadows that moved independently. Candles I never lit flickered on their own. At night, I sometimes woke to see Lenora standing in corners I hadn't left her in, silently watching me. One evening, I confronted her. "Lenora, what is this?" I asked, holding a note I found tucked beneath my pillow. She smiled faintly. "I only help you see the truth. The world is not as simple as it appears." Her eyes glinted strangely in the candlelight. There was a sharpness to them, a depth that made my stomach twist. That night, I had a dream, or was it a vision? I was lying in bed when shadows spilled from the corners of the room, twisting into grotesque forms. Lenora appeared in the center, her eyes black, holding a small ritual knife. Her lips moved, but I could not hear the words, yet I felt them. They penetrated my mind, whispering my name, promising power and fear and submission. I awoke drenched in sweat. Something had changed in the house. The air felt thick, almost alive. I began noticing more unsettling things. Animals avoided the house. The few neighbors I tried to meet seemed uncomfortable, staring past me, as if seeing something I couldn't. Mirrors would fog over, even when no heat or moisture was present. Lenora carried small pouches of herbs and black powders, muttering incantations under her breath when she thought I wasn't watching. I confronted her again. "Lenora, what are you doing? These rituals, what do they mean?" She tilted her head, smiling. "You invited me into your life. Everything I do is for you, for us, to protect you, to bind us together." I should have been terrified, but there was something mesmerizing about her voice, a dangerous comfort that made my fears momentarily dissolve. The nights became unbearable. I would wake to chanting, faint at first, then louder, echoing through the walls. Candles burned themselves down to nubs in strange formations. My belongings moved, rearranged into patterns I did not understand. And then I began seeing shadows, not from the corners of my eyes, but full figures in the hallways. They never approached, only watched. One night, I caught a glimpse of Lenora in the attic, circling a pentagram etched into the floor. Candles flickered, and a strange smell, like burning herbs and iron, filled the air. She traced symbols with her fingers, muttering words I didn't recognize. And when she turned to me, her eyes glowed with a black, unnatural light. I tried to leave. I packed a small bag and ran toward the door. But when I touched the handle, it burned my hand. Panic surged through me. I could hear her laughter, low and melodic, echoing through the house. The windows wouldn't open. The phone lines were dead. I was trapped. The next few days were a blur. Lenora no longer spoke in a normal voice. She communicated through whispers that reverberated in my mind and through gestures that seemed to manipulate the air itself. Shadows moved at her command, shapes forming around corners, following me wherever I went. She told me one night, softly, "You belong to me now. The house, the darkness, it is ours. You cannot leave." I became ill. My body weakened, my mind unraveling. I knew the black magic was not just theatrics. It was consuming me. I could feel it. binding me to the house, to her. I saw myself in mirrors, but my reflection was wrong. Shadows clung to me like living things, whispering her words. Lenora announced one evening that the ritual would be complete. She led me to the basement, a room I had never entered. The walls were lined with candles, herbs, and strange symbols drawn in blood. At the center, a shallow pit contained strange artifacts, bones, dolls, and objects I recognized from my own life. "You will see," she said, her voice both gentle and terrifying. "The world will open. You will serve, and you will understand." I tried to resist, but as I struggled, the shadows enveloped me. They whispered promises and threats, confusion and seduction. My mind swam with visions, other worlds, twisted landscapes, and entities with eyes like black holes. Lenora raised her hands, chanting in a language I felt rather than heard. Pain and ecstasy tore through me simultaneously. My body felt like it was dissolving, my will bending under her influence. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. The shadows receded. I fell to the floor, trembling, unable to breathe properly. Lenora stood over me, smiling, triumphant. "You see now," she said. "There is no escape. You are part of the house, part of me, forever." I survived that night, but not unscathed. The house no longer felt like mine. It belonged to her. Every room seemed alive, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. Mirrors reflected scenes that hadn't happened yet. Shadows lingered even in daylight, and my own reflection sometimes moved independently. I tried to leave, but the world outside felt different. People avoided me. Animals hissed or fled. And Lenora, she was everywhere and nowhere. I would see her in passing reflections, or hear her voice in my dreams. Years have passed, but the house never lets me go. I still live there, trapped in a nightmare I cannot escape. Lenora no longer needs to speak. Her power is absolute. Shadows move at her will, and I am nothing but a vessel, a witness to her dark magic. Sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, I feel her hand on my shoulder. And always, I hear the words, low and certain, "You belong to me, forever."
If you thought that story was scary, wait until you hear this next one.
When I was 28, I finally moved into a small modern apartment in the city. It was my first place on my own, and I was thrilled. Everything was perfect, except that I was hopelessly busy. Work consumed me, and I barely had time to cook, let alone clean. So I decided to hire a maid. I found an ad online. Reliable, discreet, trustworthy housekeeper available immediately. Excellent references. Her name was Elise. She arrived one sunny afternoon, a petite woman in her late 20s, with long brown hair and a gentle smile that made her seem approachable. She carried herself with perfect grace, and her movements were precise, almost rehearsed. "I'll make your life easier," she said softly. "I promise you won't have to worry about a thing." At first, it felt like a blessing. She cleaned, organized, and even did my laundry without complaint. But there was something in the way she looked at me, her eyes lingering a little too long, a soft smile that sometimes seemed almost possessive. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. It started with little things. She would leave notes in my apartment, always written in neat, elegant handwriting. At first, they were innocuous. "You forgot your coffee mug in the living room." But soon, the notes became more personal. "You look tired today. I hope you slept well. I noticed you smiled when you thought I wasn't looking." It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to laugh it off. She was just attentive, I told myself. Then she began rearranging my belongings, not just cleaning, but placing items in ways that seemed deliberate. My books, my clothes, even my shoes were moved into patterns I didn't understand. and when I asked her about it, she would smile, tilting her head. "I just like things to feel right," she said. But it wasn't just the rearranging. She began showing up at odd times. I would leave for work, return home, and she would already be there, without my scheduling her. And sometimes I would hear footsteps behind me when I was alone, or catch a glimpse of her watching me from the hallway, smiling softly. A month passed, and her behavior escalated. She stopped respecting my personal space. She lingered in rooms when I didn't need her, brushing past me as if it were natural. I began to feel trapped. Then came the subtle hints. Notes began to suggest she wanted more than a professional relationship. "I like being close to you. You notice me, don't you? We could be happy together if only you let me in." I laughed nervously the first time I read one, but a growing knot of fear started to form in my stomach. Her presence was no longer comforting. It was suffocating. One evening, I returned home late from work. The apartment was dimly lit, and she was sitting on my couch, smiling. "Hi," she said softly, her voice sweet, like honey laced with something darker. "I thought I'd wait for you." Elise, you shouldn't be here. I was gone all day," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know," she said, her smile widening, "but I missed you." Her words, simple as they were, sent a chill down my spine. Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't just attraction. This was obsession. The next few weeks were terrifying. I tried to set boundaries, but she ignored them. I asked her to leave my apartment while I was at work. She would vanish for a few hours, only to return without explanation. My friends began noticing her odd behavior, but I was too embarrassed or scared to tell anyone the truth. Then, things became physically threatening. I started waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone in my bedroom. My apartment door was locked. My phone was always on me, and yet I would see her sitting silently in the dark, watching me sleep, her eyes unblinking. I confronted her directly one evening. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "I don't. I just hired you to help me clean." She tilted her head, smiling, almost sympathetically. "I just want to be with you," she whispered. "We're meant to be together. Don't you see?" I realized then that this was beyond obsession. This was madness. One night, I came home from work to find my apartment transformed. Candles were lit around the room, forming a circle in the center of the living room. My belongings were stacked neatly in strange formations. In the middle of it all, Elise stood, holding my favorite sweater, staring at me with intensity. "Why?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're mine," she said softly. "I've always wanted you. I just had to prepare us." I backed away, panic flooding through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. She didn't resist when I called the police, oddly calm as officers arrived. But even then, I felt the hair on my neck rise. There was something unnatural about her calm, something that made the hairs stand on end. The police handcuffed her and began leading her to the car. I followed behind, relieved that at last this nightmare might end. But as the doors of the squad car closed, I blinked, and she was gone. The officers were stunned. She was right here," one shouted, checking the back seat. "She can't just disappear." I was shaking, my heart pounding. She was right here, I saw it." They searched the area, combed the street, but Elise had vanished completely. Not a trace, no sign of her. It was as if she had dissolved into the night itself. The officers were skeptical, but I knew what I had seen. Days passed, and I moved out of the apartment. I couldn't bear to stay in a place where Elise had been, a place where she might return. But even now, years later, I still feel her presence. I've rented new apartments, changed cities, changed jobs, but every once in a while, I see her, just out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I wake up in the night to faint whispers, "We'll be together soon." I've reported it to the police, to friends, but no one believes me. The woman who wanted me vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the memory of her obsession and terror. I don't know if she was human or something beyond human, but I do know this: wherever she is, she's still waiting, still watching, and one day she might return. Every time I see a shadow linger a little too long, I think of Elise, and I remember the words she whispered in the dim light of my apartment: "You're mine."